never question her love for me, but every day I have moments where I'm like, geez, like, chill out. You're really like coming
I'm
at
a bad mom, I'm a bad wife, I'm a bad woman, I'm a villain or whatever. Okay, got it. I'm not perfect, but he'd never stand up for me, period.
If he has an issue, he needs to be able to talk to family. He can't keep everything all bottled up inside.
Candace, I agree.
Okay, then
and I don't want that to happen, so I'll make a change.
The moment Mano threatens divorce on a public stage, something inside this marriage snaps in plain sight. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but with a kind of silence that feels heavier than shouting. Because Anthony does not argue, he does not interrupt, he does not defend himself, he just freezes. And that freeze tells you more about this relationship than any scream ever could. This is the shock, not the word divorce itself, but the way it lands and the way Anthony absorbs it like someone who has heard this threat enough times to know fighting back only makes things worse. You can feel the air change. Because a marriage does not reach this point overnight, it gets here inch by inch. Through moments where honesty feels dangerous and silence feels safer. Through days where speaking your truth costs more than swallowing it. Before we go any further, quick pause. I am Sabrina, and you are watching TLC Drama Live. And if you care about real behavior, real consequences, and why these couples keep repeating the same mistakes on national television, make sure you subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story is not about picking sides. It is about recognizing patterns before they swallow people whole. Back to that stage, because what we are watching is not a tantrum, not yet. It is something more unsettling. A power move disguised as pain, where the word divorce is not presented as a decision, but as a weapon. Something sharp enough to end the conversation instantly. And Anthony's reaction, or lack of one, raises the first uncomfortable question. How many times has he learned that reacting only makes things spiral faster? When one person reaches for the nuclear option this quickly, especially in public, it suggests a history where threats have worked before, where fear has kept the peace, and where love has slowly been replaced by damage control. You can almost see Anthony calculating in real time, not what he wants to say, but what he is allowed to say. Because his body language reads like someone trying to survive an emotional storm rather than resolve a disagreement. And that distinction matters. This is where the tension stops being about a tell-all moment and starts being about emotional survival. Because control does not always look like shouting or insults. Sometimes it looks like knowing the exact word that will shut the other person down and using it without hesitation. What makes this even heavier is the setting, because a tell-all is supposed to be uncomfortable, it is supposed to expose cracks, but when Mano goes straight to divorce, it shifts the goalposts entirely, turning accountability into humiliation and conversation into combat. The audience laughs nervously, the cast shifts in their seats, but Anthony stays still, and that stillness hints at a breaking point that has been building long before the cameras rolled. This is not about one bad comment or one bad day. This is about a pattern where threats replace dialogue, where love is constantly put on trial, and where one person learns that silence is the only way to keep the explosion small. And here is the quiet warning woven into this opening moment, because this tell-all is not showing us a meltdown, it is showing us exposure, the kind that happens when a private dynamic finally meets a public mirror. And the real question hanging in the air is not whether Mano means the word divorce, but what happens when Anthony finally stops treating it like a threat and starts treating it like an option. They moved to France calling it a fresh start, like a bandage over everything that hadn't healed, telling themselves this would be different, this would be peace, this would be the reset button their relationship needed, but the air didn't change, only the language did, and what looked like hope. In the beginning, started to rot the moment expectations replaced reality. Mano arrived with a list, dreams, demands, a version of happiness she had already decided on, and Anthony came with something smaller, quieter, more fragile, the belief that if he worked hard and stayed steady, maybe they'd stop fighting. Maybe she'd feel safe enough to soften. Maybe he wouldn't. Keep losing pieces of himself just to keep the house calm. But it wasn't peace they moved into, it was performance. Because the minute their feet hit French soil, Mano's standards began to rise and Anthony's margin for error began to disappear. Not with cruelty, not yet, but in glances, sighs, comparisons, corrections, a tone that said, do better, try. Harder, why aren't you enough yet? And this is where things start slipping under the surface, right where the resentment quietly builds. Because when someone keeps being told they're the reason the other person isn't happy, they stop trying to solve the problem and start hiding their truth. There were no explosions, not in the beginning. There was just the tightening Anthony folding in on himself every time his efforts were met with disappointment. Every time her silence felt louder than her words. Every time she'd call something small unacceptable, or call his effort lazy without raising her voice. Because it's not the volume that wounds, it's the weight. And this is the moment where control stops looking like control and starts looking like standards, like taste, like I'm not asking for much, except that it's always one thing more, always one version of better he's still not reaching. He starts learning which opinions lead to tension, which truths get turned into accusations, which small joys are worth hiding to avoid judgment, until there's nothing left to share except what he already knows she'll approve. That's not partnership. That's containment. And by the time he realizes it, he's fluent in silence. By the time Anthony stopped finishing his sentences, no one noticed. That's how subtle it was. A pause here. A subject switched mid-thought there, and eventually, full conversations turned into safe fragments, edited for tone, scrubbed for triggers, filtered for fallout. This wasn't silence as peace. This was silence as protection. Not just from Mano's reactions, but from the way even neutral comments could get twisted into emotional betrayals. He didn't delete his messages because they were scandalous. He deleted them because context didn't matter anymore. And reading something with the wrong tone of voice could light a fire that took days to put out. He shortened his phone calls with family because it was easier than explaining why they upset her. He stopped mentioning things he enjoyed, because if she didn't approve, the conversation would turn into another subtle punishment. Eye rolls, long silences, emotional withdrawal, or worse, that tired sigh that somehow managed to sound both disappointed and disgusted at the same time. And yet, it would be too easy to paint her as the villain here. Because Mano didn't come from nowhere. She hears judgment everywhere. From the audience, from Anthony's family, from anyone who points out the cracks. She's been framed as the problem so many times, she now preempts it. So, when Anthony stays quiet in public, she reads it as betrayal. Why didn't you defend me? Why do you let them think I'm the crazy one? From her side, silence looks like abandonment. From his, silence is the only thing that hasn't backfired. And that's the tragedy. They are both reacting to pain. Hers is loud and defensive. His is quiet and afraid. And in the middle, communication dies. At what point does protecting someone from your truth become its own kind of betrayal? Intent is one thing, but impact doesn't care. Anthony may not have meant to make Mano feel alone, but his distance fed her worst fears. And Mano may not have meant to make Anthony shut down, but her volatility trained him to withhold. It's not about fault anymore. It's about pattern. They're stuck in a loop where fear has replaced honesty, and they're both losing each other in the name of survival. The more Anthony swallows, the more Mano spirals. The more she spirals, the less safe he feels speaking. And so, silence becomes the currency of the relationship. The only form of communication that doesn't require a cleanup crew. Not because it's healthy, but because it's predictable. And predictable feels safer than honest when both of you are bleeding in different directions. The shift is instant. One moment, the conversation is about behavior, about how things felt, about what happened. And the next, Mano takes the air out of the room with a single phrase. I'm a bad wife, a bad mother, a bad woman. It's not accountability. It's escape. It's a trapdoor. She disappears through whenever the walls close in. The minute someone points out a pattern, she turns it into an indictment of her entire existence. Suddenly, she's not being asked to reflect. She's being persecuted. And once she goes there, the room freezes. Because who wants to keep pressing someone who's already declared herself worthless? This is the part that makes people squirm. Because pain is real. Hurt is real. But when every critique becomes an attack and every observation becomes emotional cruelty, the space for accountability vanishes. It becomes impossible to talk about what happened without being accused of causing harm. And Anthony? He folds. Again. Because how do you respond when someone turns your quiet plea for support into confirmation that you're the villain in their tragedy? When someone weaponizes their pain, they turn every boundary into a betrayal. And the worst part? The audience lets it happen. They wince. They soften. The emotional rhythm speeds up. Not because anyone raised their voice, but because suddenly the conversation is sprinting toward the edge of a cliff, and no one wants to be the one who pushed it. But this is where clarity matters, because pain does not cancel impact. You can be deeply wounded and still hurt people. You can feel misunderstood and still be responsible for your part. The spiral Mano pulls everyone into isn't about healing. It's about control through collapse. If she feels devastated, then she must be right. If she's the most hurt, then her actions don't count. But that logic doesn't hold. Not when people keep disappearing emotionally, just to keep her stable. Anthony's silence isn't compassion anymore. It's self-protection. And the people around them are starting to see it. Because when you cry wolf enough times, even empathy starts to pull back. There's a difference between vulnerability and manipulation. And this tell-all is about to make that line visible. Because the public consequences are coming next. And this time, Mano won't be able to disappear into tears without someone asking what those tears are hiding. There's something about those tell-all chairs that changes people. The lighting's too bright, the silence too loaded, and every breath feels like a dare. When Mano sits down, there's no soft landing. She gets hit with an anonymous question from someone on the cast asking if Anthony still makes her want to die inside, and without blinking, she says, sometimes, yes. Not out of spite, not out of rage, almost casually. Like she's reciting a weather report about her own marriage. And the room reacts. But she doesn't. There's no panic. No pullback. She doubles down. Says it's just her being real. Says everyone goes through lows. Says she's not going to lie to protect anyone's feelings. But honesty isn't the problem. It's what she chooses to be honest about. Because clarity would have meant explaining why she feels distant or disconnected. Clarity could have opened a door. But Mano doesn't want a door. She wants a reaction. And Anthony, sitting right next to her, flinches but doesn't fight. He doesn't match her blow for blow. He doesn't even defend himself. Instead, he tries to patch the hole she just made with one sentence. I never doubt that she loves me. And you can feel the air change again. You can love someone and still be drowning in them. That's what starts to land now. Anthony's not denying the pain. He's just so used to carrying it that he forgot he's allowed to put it down. You can hear it in his voice. Soft, tired, like someone explaining a wound that never quite healed right. He wants the marriage to work. He wants Mano to feel heard. But the more she swings, the more he shrinks. And suddenly, this isn't a relationship anymore. It's a performance where one person's truth is always louder, always heavier, always more important. This moment flips the emotional balance. It's no longer about who's right. It's about who's worn out. The cast notices. The host notices. The audience notices. Because when a man starts to look smaller every time his partner speaks, it's not chemistry, it's corrosion. This is no longer a private story. This is a public unraveling. And for the first time, the audience isn't asking what Mano's going to say next. They're waiting for Anthony. Waiting to see if he'll stop translating her rage into love. Waiting to hear if he'll finally say the quiet part out loud. The part he swallowed for too long. The part that might change everything. Anthony wasn't idle. He worked, first at the camp, then in the kitchen of a fast food joint, scrubbing pans, clocking hours, doing what needed to be done. Not glamorous, not impressive, but real work. The kind that keeps a roof overhead and bills paid. But to Mano, it wasn't enough. Not because he didn't try, but because it didn't look right. 900 euros a month wasn't just low. It was beneath her. And she said so, not in a cruel scream, but in that clipped, dismissive way that cuts deeper because it pretends to be reasonable. She asked why he was even doing it. She told him it wasn't worth it. She made it clear that effort without status didn't count. And that's when the illusion shattered. It's not about money. It's about meaning, because when survival gets judged by how polished it looks, someone always ends up feeling worthless for doing their best. Anthony didn't want applause. He wanted acknowledgement. Instead, he got correction. And over time, that kind of correction starts to feel like quiet contempt. Every shift he worked became a reminder that she didn't respect what it cost him to keep going. Every early morning, every tired night, every silent paycheck that didn't meet her standards added another layer to the resentment that neither of them could name. But both of them felt. When effort gets dismissed, people stop showing up with their whole selves. They show up with the version they hope won't get criticized. And still, empathy doesn't disappear. Because Mano's frustration has roots too. She moved across the world, gave up her life, said yes to a dream that now feels small and unstable. Her anger isn't just shallow judgment, it's disappointment wrapped in shame. But the difference is, she doesn't question whether her disappointment is valid. She assumes it is. And that's where the gap opens. Because Anthony is expected to absorb hers while keeping his own invisible. This is where the loop tightens. Gratitude disappears. Sacrifice turns into ammunition. They both feel underappreciated, but only one of them gets to express it without being told they're overreacting. And just when it seems like the tension can't escalate further, Mano drops something completely out of left field. She's campaigning to be mayor of the village. That's the moment where distraction takes over. Not because she's not serious, but because it's easier to chase a new image than to sit with the current reality. If she can win approval from strangers, maybe she won't need it from Anthony. Maybe power in public will cover up what's collapsing in private. There she is, smiling wide, eyes lit up, arms outstretched as she fangirls over Jenny like a teenager meeting her pop idol for the first time. The cameras love it. The producers eat it up. Mano is glowing, magnetic, the kind of reality TV personality you can't stop watching because she knows how to fill a room with noise and heat and charm. She squeals. She hugs. She beams. It's the most alive we've seen her all season. But what no one says out loud, what everyone feels but can't quite name, is that none of this energy ever shows up when she's around her own husband. That smile? It's never for Anthony. That lightness? It doesn't survive the ride home. It's not hypocrisy. It's survival. Mano knows how she wants to be seen. She's building a version of herself that isn't weighed down by compromise or failure or things that don't sparkle on camera. She performs confidence like it's armor, and she wears ambition like it'll keep her warm. And to be fair, it works on stage. But the minute the applause fades and the production crew turns their focus elsewhere, the cracks come roaring back. Because you can only hold a mask so long before it turns into a cage. When your public face becomes more rewarding than your private one, intimacy dies and performance takes its place. Backstage, Anthony can feel it. She's glowing with strangers and drained with him. There's no curiosity left between them. Just tasks, resentments, and missed glances. And that contrast becomes a story. Mano plays big for the room. Anthony disappears into it. She's commanding space. He's trying not to collapse. What began as a marriage now looks like a brand partnership with bad terms. The fascination for the audience now isn't just about her. It's about the split screen playing out in real time. The charisma she weaponizes in public versus the control she quietly enforces in private. And for viewers at home, the question flips. Is Mano building something new? Or is she escaping the reality she's already broken? That's where family enters the frame. Anthony's sister. His aunt. The contacts Mano has blocked, filtered, removed. The people who've seen the version of her that doesn't perform, and who don't buy the charm act anymore. The tension isn't just between husband and wife now. It's about access, loyalty, and who gets to speak. And that boundary, the one between family and control, is about to snap. Anthony doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't accuse. He simply says it out loud. For once, without flinching, his family can't reach him anymore. Not because they drifted, not because of time zones, but because Mano controls his phone, monitors his messages, asks for explanations after every call. His sister is blocked. His aunt barely speaks to him. His phone has become a filter, and Mano is the one deciding what gets through. And for the first time, he admits what it's cost him, not in dramatic language, but in that quiet way people speak when they've accepted something painful for too long. He says he's had to delete texts just to avoid another blow-up. He says he can't even have a private conversation without feeling like he's doing something wrong. And as he speaks, the room doesn't explode, it slows. This isn't a shouting match. This is emotional claustrophobia. It's not about privacy anymore. It's about fear. Not the theatrical kind. This isn't about someone cowering. It's about the subtle, exhausting kind, where your inner voice has to pause before you speak. Where every normal interaction has to be weighed, softened, or buried, just to maintain the illusion of peace. And when he says that out loud, everything changes. Because now the audience has to sit with it. Peace that depends on silence isn't peace. It's quiet obedience dressed up as love. But to be fair, family judgment cuts deep. Mano's been the subject of gossip, whispers, and cold glances. She's felt attacked, misunderstood, painted as the problem by people who never saw the full picture. Her defensiveness didn't come from nowhere. But the counterpoint only holds for so long. Because feeling judged doesn't justify locking people out. Hurt doesn't grant you the right to isolate your partner. Mano doesn't deny it. She circles it. She shifts the tone. She brings up how hurtful it is to hear what his family says. And again, she flips the focus from action to impact, from behavior to emotion, from control to pain. But this time, it doesn't land the same way. Because Anthony's exhaustion is no longer quiet. The cost of keeping Mano calm has emptied him, and everyone can see it. So when the argument starts to slip, when the discomfort rises, when the questions get too real, Mano pulls the oldest lever she has left. She threatens to leave. Again. Divorce. Again. And this time, no one flinches. Not even Anthony. Because after a while, even threats lose their power when people stop begging you to stay. She doesn't storm out. She detonates. Mano rips off her dress. Not in drama, but desperation. Clawing at the zipper like it's choking her. Yelling that she's done. That she won't be humiliated anymore. That everyone here wants to see her fall. The producers follow. The cameras hold. But the story's already changed. This isn't just a meltdown. This is a pattern repeating itself in front of everyone. No longer protected by edits or excuses. And what's striking isn't the outburst. It's the timing. Because the hard part was already over. Anthony tries to remind her. He says they did their part. He says they can relax now. But for Mano, the danger isn't what happened on camera. It's how it made her feel. She doesn't say she's upset by what she said. She says she's upset by how it looked. Not because it was false, but because it was public. That's the difference. For her, being wrong in private is survivable. Being exposed in public is war. And instead of sitting with discomfort, she rewrites it as betrayal. Humiliation isn't always something done to you. Sometimes it's the feeling that appears when accountability finally lands and there's nowhere left to run. Anthony doesn't push. He tries to reason, to center her, to bring her back down. He tells her the segment's over. He reminds her that every couple took their turn. He even says it's respectful to stay and listen to the others now. But Mano hears none of it. Because when she's spiraling, logic is just more evidence that you're not on her side. He says one sentence too calmly, and it becomes proof that he enjoyed watching her break. She says, "Of course you're happy. You got to humiliate your wife." And with that, the loop snaps shut again. Pain turns into blame. Blame turns into fury. Fury turns into threats. This is the cycle. Anthony speaks carefully. Mano hears cruelty. Anthony tries to soothe. Mano accuses him of betrayal. And every time, the stakes rise until the only way out is flight. What makes this moment different isn't that it happened. It's that the audience finally sees it without filters. They watch the quiet attempts to connect. They watch the calm explanations. And now, they watch a woman so trapped in performance that she mistakes boundaries for attacks. So when she says she's leaving, when she tells him not to follow, when she hurls divorce again like a dare, the only question left is whether anyone, including Anthony, is still willing to keep rehearsing this scene one more time. The studio doesn't feel tense anymore. It feels emptied. No screaming, no accusations, just the kind of silence that lingers after too much has been said, and none of it can be taken back. Mano is gone. The cameras stay on Anthony, but he's not performing. He's not making excuses. He's not scrambling to fix it. He's just sitting in the quiet, finally not rushing to shield anyone from the weight of their own words. For the first time, this doesn't feel like a man hoping things will magically get better. It feels like someone realizing he has a choice. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in clarity. Because once you name what it costs to keep someone happy, it's harder to keep paying that price without noticing the damage. She left in a storm, but her words still echo. Don't worry about me. Go have fun. Chloe and Greta are single. At first, it felt like another dig, another attempt to reclaim power by pretending she doesn't care. But now, in the silence, it lands differently. That wasn't power. It was fear. Not fear of Anthony leaving, but fear of losing control over how she's seen. The performance collapsed, and the spotlight felt like fire. So she ran. And what's left isn't drama. It's aftermath. Eventually, threats stop working when the other person stops begging you to stay. The audience isn't wondering whether she meant the divorce. They're wondering whether Anthony is finally done feeling guilty for not being enough. Because this was never about perfection. It was about survival. And now, the mask is gone, the script is broken, and all that's left is a man who has every right to step out of the loop. This isn't about whether the marriage ends. It's about whether Anthony chooses peace over performance. Whether he decides that love should not require silence. That survival is not the same thing as stability. That being the good guy doesn't mean absorbing endless damage in private just to keep the peace in public. And for Mano, the fear might pass, or it might get louder. But if the threats no longer move anyone, they'll eventually become noise. So the story closes, not with a scream, but with a shift. One that doesn't beg for sympathy or clapbacks, but leaves one question hanging in the air. When silence stops protecting you, what do you say next? And when someone finally calls a bluff, what happens to the person who always played the lead? Because next time, the silence might not be from fear. It might be from someone who already left.